Proverbs, so if you're taking notes, just jot down the reference and then go home, and I hope that you'll read it later and think about this. But here's the whole deal that I did, this would have been a month or so ago, a couple months. I did kind of an informal survey, and I asked married couples, what are the top issues that you need to address or that you confront or have problems with in your marriage? And the number one issue that came across was communication. I mean, and all other problems, when you think about that, and as I talk to people, are connected to this one area. Problems with money, problems with sex, problems with in-laws, problems with how you spend your vacations, problems in roles and expectations. All of that and more come right back to the issue of communication. In fact, one husband said to his wife, "I know you believe you understand what you think I've said, but I'm not sure you realize what you heard is what I meant." Did you get that? See, communication is not automatic. Just because you say "I do" doesn't mean you're naturally inclined to be able to have the ability to communicate effectively. Communication is a skill that you actually have to learn and work on. And many of the lessons that you learn and have to learn when it comes to communication as a couple, and in fact, what I'm talking about this morning goes beyond marriage and just relationships in general, but a lot of it has to do with trial and error. Last December, Sandy and I we celebrated 41 years of a great marriage. 41 years, man, I've never been married that long. And but we're still learning how to communicate. And so what I want to do this morning is I just want to share some simple steps that we have learned, and not that we're perfect in this, but steps that we have learned and are learning in communicating as a couple. And these are steps that you can take in your relationships, you can take in your marriage, that will have a profound effect on your marriage or on your relationships as you apply them. And the communication I'm referring to this morning is more than, well, how's the weather? It's more than, how are you feeling? It's even more than, do these pants make my butt look big? Which maybe is a definite issue when it comes to marriage. But anyway, the level of communication I'm talking about this morning is, how do I share my dreams? How do I share what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking and my disappointments and my joys and my expectations and my fears, what I really want to do, what I wish could happen? How do we communicate on the deepest level? When there's an issue in our marriage, how do we communicate and talk about that? Well, one of the first things you need to do is choose the right time. Choose the right time. Ecclesiastes 8:6 says there is a right time and a right way for everything. And what that also means that there's also a wrong time and a wrong way too. You see, the first key of communication is timing. Timing is huge. And every great communicator knows this. The first rule of communication is to do it at the right time. You can have the greatest message, but said at the wrong time will ruin it. You may have something critical and crucial and vital to talk about, but said at the wrong time, it will fall on deaf ears. You don't communicate when you or your spouse are tired. You don't communicate when either of you are frustrated or when you're getting ready for bed, or you don't communicate when you're walking out the door to go to work. Oh, by the way, you want to talk. It just doesn't work. You don't communicate when you're in a hurry or when you're under pressure. You wait until the time is right. And you may be ready to talk, but is your spouse? Maybe you've been thinking about this all day long. And you come home from work and you want to talk about it, but your spouse hasn't been thinking about it. In fact, they've been dealing with some of the pressures and some of the stress at work, and they've just been through a whole different set of problems at work. In fact, one study done a number of years ago found out that the most violent arguments in a relationship, in a couple, were right before meal times. And that was when the blood sugar was low and frustration from work was high and work and traffic problems were still fresh in their minds. The key to communication, or the first thing we want to nail down this morning, is choose the right time. And again, this applies not just to a marriage, but this applies to friendships. Because two people, two sinners, there's going to be conflict. You've got to find the right time to deal with it. Next, think before you speak. And then think before you speak. And again, what I'm talking about this morning is you're not going to go, whoa, I didn't know that. Think before you speak. Proverbs 16:23 says, intelligent people think before they speak. What they say is then more persuasive. If you want to be heard, if you want to be persuasive, put your mind in gear before your mouth goes in motion. Anybody ever heard that before? You know, don't shoot from the hip. It's important to give it some thought and time and make sure the communication is right. You plan out what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. You think about the actual words that you're going to say. You think about making it clear. You don't leave room for ambiguity. I mean, too much conflict in a relationship happens because one spouse says something and uses words that could be used or could be meant in a different way. I mean, think about what your spouse might think when you use the words that you'll be using. I mean, when you think about ambiguity, you're choosing words that your spouse may not know what they mean. I need you home early today is not clear enough to say, I need you home by 5. I hit a sale today is vague by saying, watch out on the credit card. To say, oh, by the way, you might need gas in the car, is not a clear way of saying, good luck if you make it to the corner. There have been too many times when Sandy and I, where I have said something without thinking it through, and it led to misunderstanding and conflict. And too many times I found myself afterwards saying or thinking, if I had just given it more thought, this would not have happened. Or 30 minutes after the conversation, I realized a better way could have been used, could have been said. Thinking through it before the communication would have eliminated a huge amount of conflict. I mean, think about it. How will you bring it up? What examples will you use to get your point across? Ask questions, but not questions that are going to put your spouse on the defensive. And your introduction to how you're going to communicate is huge as well. I mean, to say, this place is so filthy, the roaches are begging for raid. Not a good way to bring up, we need to keep the house cleaner. When did you get a new pair of boots? Oh, those aren't your boots, those are your dirty socks. Not a good way to say, would you put your socks and underwear in the hamper? I know you've forgotten their names, but let me reintroduce you to your children. It's not a good way to bring up working too much. By the way, let me just throw this in. The whole working, being gone from home issue. One of the issues that couples have is that he's off doing his thing and she's off doing her thing. And they might share a garage and they might share a bed, But there's very little time that talking takes place. If you're going to grow a relationship, you've got to talk. And what happens is the time to talk is so small, it's reduced to we need to hurry and talk about the things that are important, the finances, the budget, the kids, what are we going to... And so there's tension there because that's the only time you have to talk. You see, building a relationship is far more than just communicating the important issues. It's just talking sometimes. So think before you speak. And then listen first. Oh, this is huge. Proverbs 18:13. Answering before listening is both stupid and rude. Anybody ever question the reality and the relevancy of the Scripture has not read the Bible, you know? I mean, have you ever been so anxious to share a point that you had absolutely no idea what the other person is saying because you're ready to say what you want to say? You get so caught up in making your point, you're not listening at all. You only think about what you're going to say next. You know, James 1:19 says, don't ever forget that it is best to listen much and speak little. I mean, how many marriages... How many relationship problems, how many marriage problems would be solved if we just followed this one simple, clear passage? But we get into trouble because our natural tendency is want to talk more than listen. We want to have the last word. We want to make sure our point is known. God did not give you 2 ears and 1 mouth as an accident. And when you listen, don't just listen with your ears, listen with your eyes. Watch the body language, because actions many times speak louder than words. Your response is primarily based on what they are saying to you emotionally and visually, not just the words they choose. In fact, a study was done. 7% of communication is through our words. 43% is done through the tone of our voice. 50% is through body language, facial expressions, gestures, postures, the look in their eye. Husbands, when you ask your wife what's wrong, and she says, nothing. Nothing never means nothing. What's she saying? What's her face? There have been times when Sandy and I have been talking, and I've actually had to say, what is your face saying to me? Because body language is so crucial. You listen first. Listen with your ears, but also listen with your eyes. The words you choose. Use encouraging words. Say it positively. Say it with encouraging words. My parents always said this to me. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Anybody heard that? Either my parents hung out with your parents or something. Proverbs 16:21, a wise, mature person is known for his understanding. The more pleasant his words, the more persuasive he is. Anybody can be a critic. Anybody can use negative words. In fact, some people think that's their life objective, is to be negative and critical. I mean, they're always pointing out what's wrong, always criticizing, always bringing up the bad or the weaknesses. Monuments are made to remember people who encourage and build others up. You don't see monuments to people who are critical and negative. Again, I go to the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 12:25. A word of encouragement does wonders. Now, to do this, you need to keep the positive and the strengths of your spouse in mind. Don't focus on the negative. Everybody has negatives. Don't focus on the shortcomings, because you both have shortcomings. Don't focus on the weaknesses or the mistakes, because we both have weaknesses and mistakes. You can't be encouraging while you're thinking about the weaknesses or the faults of your spouse. Your husband, your wife, has positive traits. So use them in your communication. It's a story of a woman who was very unhappy in her marriage, and she went to see a divorce attorney to work out the paperwork, and she was so angry at her husband that she asked the attorney his advice on what can I do to really hurt my husband. And he said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home and I want you to talk to him in encouraging words. I want you to compliment him. I want you to tell him you love him. I want you to point out his strengths and what you appreciate about him. And do this for a couple of months while I work out the divorce papers. Then walk in and I'll give you the papers and you serve those papers to him and it will rip his heart out. So the woman went home, followed his advice. A few months later, she came back in, and the attorney handed her the divorce papers to look over. She says, oh, we won't need them because we're getting to go on our second honeymoon. The difference was encouraging words. Simply using encouraging words will take a marriage that's circling the drain and will bring it back up. Using encouraging words will take what you might want to call an average nominal marriage and make it above normal, above average. Using encouraging words will take a great marriage and make it even better. And here's how you use some encouraging words. Reaffirm your commitment to your marriage. When there's an issue, admit it. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm disappointed. I'm discouraged. But I am committed to you in our marriage. I love you. 3 of the most powerful words in a marriage. 3 of the most powerful words that can calm a conflict. And never let an argument, never let communication, a day go by without looking in the eyes of your spouse and saying, I love you. Now, it doesn't mean you feel loving. It doesn't mean you feel good or you feel romantic or you feel in love. This kind of love is a choice. And you need to daily choose to love your spouse, because if you've been married longer than 24 hours, you know there's going to be times, moments, seasons, days, weeks, maybe even longer, that you don't feel married. You don't feel in love. If you are waiting to build your marriage on feelings, you're probably over-emotionalizing your entire relationship. Daily choose to say, I love you. And make God a part of your marriage. This is huge. I say this because I see this happening too many times. A marriage is having difficulty, so let's go to church. Let's read our Bible. Let's think more about God. And you need to do that before the conflict. Make God a part of your marriage. Don't wait until your marriage is struggling to connect with God. Building a strong marriage begins with connecting with God before problems arise, not just in the middle of problems. And this goes back to what I said earlier about using encouraging words. You know, to say to each other, I believe in God, I believe in His power, I believe He can make our marriage work. So where do we go from here? Well, I challenge you to come back next week. Because next week we're going to talk about the second issue that was communicated to me that tends to be an issue amongst couples, and that is finances. The message is called Till Debt Do Us Part, and I'm going to share a system that has worked for Sandy and I for years and years and years, and I think can work for you as well. Get a Bible and start reading it. Again, even if you're not having problems and conflict, Get a Bible and start reading it now. And if you don't have a good Bible, maybe the only Bible you have is the one that's still pressing the rose from your senior prom, or you can't pronounce the words correctly, come see me. We'll give you a Bible that you can read easier and understand. And some of you might be thinking, wow, this is just way too much. Anything worth of value is going to take work. What is easy is bailing out. What is easy is contacting an attorney, not speaking, not spending time together. That's the easy route. If you want to make your marriage work, and that's the real question, you will have to work at it. Great marriages don't happen by accident. They take work. But the work has huge rewards and payoffs. In fact, I challenge you to go on a date this week. Just by yourself. Not a movie. Not sitting in front of the tube and watching Netflix. Maybe go out to dinner. Something where you've got to look at each other, where you've got to talk. If your marriage is great, go on a date. If your marriage is in trouble, go on a date and communicate on this date. Choose the right time, think before you speak, begin with your spouse's needs, listen first, use encouraging words. All right? Now, let me talk specifically to those of you considering separation or divorce, because that's a reality. Whether you've started the process or maybe you've just been thinking about it. Here's the deal. What I've just shared, and in fact this entire series, this stuff really works. It really works. In fact, you spend the next 3 months applying what you're hearing today and in this series, and apply these with every ounce of energy you have as if your life depends on it, then and only then make the decision as to what should happen in your marriage. Because your marriage, regardless of whether it's a great marriage or circling the drain, can be more than it is now today. If your marriage is suffering, it can be better and can be more than it is. If your marriage is so-so, it can be more. If your marriage is great and fantastic, it can be more.